Great. Great. Thanks everyone for joining. So as you know, this is the IC Edge Lunch and Learn, which is our version of a book club, going through the chapter by chapter of the upcoming book of my colleagues and co-founders of IC Edge and Intrivity, Wendy Adair, Nancy Buchan, and Xiao-ping Chen. Today, we are very privileged to have Wendy Adair talking about effective communication in multicultural teams. She will also be covering another chapter, which is a little bit of the theory. So this is really good background for all of you who are using the tool or thinking about the tool or just interested in the topic. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to Wendy and let her introduce herself very briefly for those that don't know her. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you so much, everyone, it's so nice to see we have people from literally all over, from coast to coast, and some places in the middle, in the States. I'm actually coming from Canada. So I'm in Waterloo, University of Waterloo, Ontario. It's about an hour west of Toronto. And I'm on the faculty there in industrial organizational psychology. And I am a co-founder of IC Edge / Intrivity. And yeah, I'm happy to be telling you a bit more about this book that we have coming out. It is in press. It is supposed to be available by the end of the month. So we'll be sure to let everyone know when that's the case. It's a book that, and I have a list of all the chapters at the end of the presentation, but it is a book that is available both in hard copy and e-versions, and you can buy the whole book, and you can buy apparently e-versions of separate chapters. So yeah, so the entire volume really addresses all of the sort of theory and research and future directions that our team here has been talking about for the last 10 to 15 years. And it's the first time we've really put it all together. So that's pretty exciting. So what I'm going to go through today, and these Lunch and Learns, the book club version of the Lunch and Learns, we're trying to give you sort of a snapshot of what's covered in the book, but clearly the book goes into a lot more detail. So if there's time at the end, I mean, actually along the way, please do interrupt if you have questions or comments or an example you want to share. The last month when we did this, Nancy did an introduction to the book and the theory on low-high context and context dependence. And if you haven't seen that, it was video recorded. And so you probably got an email with it. If not, I'm sure we can send it to you again if you're interested in hearing more about that. Okay, so I will just get started. The topics I'm covering today, yeah, they're actually chapters 3 and 4. So I have a bit of a typo here because we do have an introductory chapter as well, but it's a chapter on theory. So the most common communication theories that are used to study processes of interpersonal adjustment and adaptation in intercultural communication. And then the chapter that we have on multicultural teams. And the way the book is set up is there's 2 theory chapters at the front, and then basically the theory then is brought into, I think, 7 different organizational spheres. And then it ends with sort of a revised model and future directions. And so the multicultural teams is the first organizational sphere. And I wanted to start and open with this quote from Oprah Winfrey that great communication begins with connection, because it's something that we, over the past couple of years, have really been emphasizing more in our teaching when we are showing people how to use the tool and some of the way the outcomes from using it. We're really we're focusing not only on sort of understanding, right, multicultural, intercultural communication effectiveness, but also on the interpersonal aspects that go along with that, and how when you are able to sort of overcome those barriers and communicate effectively in an intercultural environment, there's a lot of social value that's created as well in terms of building bonds and bridges and connections with different people. Okay, so intercultural communication perspectives. I'm going to go through about 5 theories here. This is probably the boring part of the talk, but please do interrupt if you have any questions, if you want me to go into more detail. So in intercultural communication, there are several goals. One is the communication part, right? That we're hoping that the person we are sending a message to is able to decode that message and understand it in the way that we as the sender intended. So that's the communication goal. Then you have sort of the production or performance goal. So you want the interaction to flow naturally, and you want it to produce some kind of desired outcomes, right? And especially in an organizational setting, there's some reason that you're communicating with these people who are from different cultural backgrounds. And then, as I mentioned, there's this aspect of interpersonal or social value, interpersonal connection. So communication is a means of bringing people psychologically closer. So it can build understanding between people, enable perspective taking and connection, which we know is very important aspect of intercultural competence. It facilitates cooperation, coordination, and collaboration if you have those sort of strong interpersonal bonds. And then what gets in the way of effective intercultural communication? The most obvious that the person we are communicating with from a different cultural background has norms, behavioral scripts that are not familiar to us. And so the encoding, transmission, and decoding processes are all, possibly happening with a lens that's different than ours, which can create lots of opportunities for misunderstanding. And Nancy actually in the last talk spent a lot of time sort of unpacking that process, if you're interested in that. In a multicultural setting, people with different native languages, there may be accents people are speaking with, people may not have the same level of fluency, words may carry different meanings. So even if you're speaking the same language, you're not necessarily communicating effectively. Uncertainty and anxiety is a big component of the intercultural communication setting. And as you'll see, the first theory I'm going to introduce really focuses on that aspect. So how do we respond and adapt to facilitate intercultural communication and interpersonal connection? Let's see, how did I get this to move before? Yeah, so this first theory is called anxiety uncertainty management theory. And it defines anxiety as the affective or emotional equivalent of uncertainty, which is evident in feelings of apprehension and unease when interacting with a cultural outgroup member. And so what this theory suggests is that anxiety and uncertainty are very uncomfortable for us. It's sort of a negative state of arousal, and we naturally try to reduce those feelings because they are uncomfortable. And in the process of trying to reduce anxiety and uncertainty, we're using psychological and cognitive resources, and therefore we have fewer resources available in order to encode and decode messages with the complexity that we need to do when we're communicating cross-culturally. So according to this theory, some of the strategies that people will use to reduce anxiety and uncertainty in intercultural communication. One is to try to adapt to the other person's communication style. And so we see examples of this in cultural intelligence and intercultural communication competence models. Another common response actually is that we sort of, we freeze. So instead of trying to be more like the other, we sort of freeze and go back to what we know how to do well. And so you can imagine that that's going to really limit the effectiveness of the communication. And then the third strategy is to leave, to exit the situation as soon as you can. And so I have one paper from actually a long time ago now, but that shows that in cross-cultural negotiations, it is very common for people to end the negotiation earlier than they might have if they were speaking with someone from their own cultural background. And there is sort of this level of discomfort. And then when you are able to reach a deal, this degree of sort of relief that, oh my God, okay, we reached a deal, let's just end it now. Whereas in negotiation, to get a really valuable deal for both parties, you have to kind of keep searching beyond that. But that's an example of what I mean by exit. Okay, the next theory is communication accommodation theory. So this theory is a little bit different because it talks about the anxiety uncertainty management theory is more about the individual actor, the sender, and how they react and adjust in an intercultural communication encounter. And CAT is more about the interaction between the two. So it's got both the back and the forth of the communication. And the theory explains that communication patterns tend to converge or diverge as a function of how we manage interpersonal relationships. So this theory really emphasizes that communication has both an informational function and a relational function. And so if we have a motivation to connect with our counterpart, a desire to develop a shared group identity with them, then we're going to naturally engage in styles of communication that are going to be complementary to that person's style. If, on contrast, our motivation is to distance ourselves from the other person, or if they're in a different cultural group, right, to sort of maintain our distinctiveness from that other culture group, then the kind of communication behaviors we engage in will diverge from the style of the other person. So for intercultural communication, this theory says that sort of the successful path is for both parties to engage in communication acts that complement one another. So you wouldn't have to necessarily completely adapt the other person's style, but you would want to be flexible and adjust your own style so that it's working in a complementary fashion with the other person. This theory does specify it's important that there are two sort of criteria that must be met for this to work well. So first of all, your counterpart has to notice that you are adjusting your communication style, that you are accommodating in some way to them, and they have to attribute positive intentions. So if they notice that you're adjusting your communication style and they believe that you're doing that in a manipulative or strategic way to try to take advantage of them, then the interpersonal distance is not going to get closer. Okay, so that's that one. Identity negotiation theory. So this is, I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but it's another cross-cultural communication theory. So it's related to how we manage and maintain our cultural identity, so that when we encounter someone from another culture, our own cultural identity becomes salient. And the way we engage in communication with that other person is going to be in such a way that we try to maintain our own identity, manage sort of face, you could say. This is sometimes called the face negotiation theory. And that includes both the need to kind of establish connection or common in-group identity with your counterpart, but also to maintain your own individual distinctiveness, because we all have sort of multiple identities. So there's sort of that balance factor there. So those three theories are all from the field of communication. This one, cross-cultural code switching, comes originally from linguistics, but this work by Malinsky is from in the area of management. And he defines cross-cultural code switching as the intentional adaptation of one's behavior in a foreign environment to conform to the cultural norms of that setting. So one of the things that's different about this theory and the others is that the way someone adjusts their communication, it's not just so that you get the information you need. It's not just so you get the job done you need to get done. But it also has sort of these motivations to fit in, to do good work, to take others' perspectives. So it's a very it's been called impression management. Some management scholars would call cross-cultural code switching impression management. There's a lot of literature on sort of code switching, both in a cross-cultural and an interracial workplace setting, that shows it can have really negative consequences. So the positive consequences would be that you fit in more, you're accepted by others, you're heard, you're listened to. But some of the negative consequences are that it can be really taxing. It leads to exhaustion and burnout. And then there's also literature pointing out that, yeah, anytime we have a diverse group of employees and then they all try to be like whatever the cultural majority is, we're really stifling unique ways of thinking and expression that we claim we want to encourage, because that is the value in diversity perspective. Okay, dynamic constructivist perspectives. So these are from the field of cross-cultural psychology. The research is grounded in studies done with bicultural and multicultural individuals. All the initial work was done with Chinese Americans on the West Coast of the US. And basically what this research showed is that when people have multiple cultural identities, that you can sort of prime different identities, and it will also prime that person's way of thinking and the cultural norms that go along with that identity. So, for example, if you have, a Chinese American individual and they're in a research study and they're surrounded by posters that are icons of the US, maybe there's, the Golden Gate Bridge and Superman, and then they engage in a research study, maybe it's measuring their communication style, it's going to be more normative of the US culture. And if they're sitting in a room where there's all sorts of images that prime their Chinese cultural identity, then all of a sudden they're going to start thinking more, their cognitive processes, the way they communicate is going to be more similar to the Chinese cultural identity norms. So over time, this theory evolved in a couple different ways. One is that a culture's influence on an individual's behavior, it has to be it's a function of both the cultural identities in the individual, but also the situation. So it's not just, are you surrounded by icons and images that prime a certain cultural mindset, but it's also what is the situation you are in, right? So are you in a situation where you're hanging out in a bar with your friends, or are you in a meeting at work with your superior, right? If you're in a meeting at work with your superior and your Chinese identity is activated, then you're going to express more sort of power-oriented awareness and status consciousness. But that might not be activated if you were sitting in a bar with a bunch of friends, because there's not that power aspect of the situation. Okay. And then lastly, polyculturalism takes it sort of even a step farther. So polyculturalism, it's also all about sort of the complexity of our multicultural identities, the different situations we are in, and then also the fact that the cultural landscape is constantly dynamic and always evolving. So that theory is just sort of taking it to the next level of complexity, saying like, yeah, we're pretty good at predicting individuals' behaviors, multicultural individuals' behaviors, but it's more than just the cultural identity being activated and accessible. It's more than just the situational cues. It's also the environment itself. Okay. That's all I have on the theory. And I feel like phew, because that's the kind of heavy stuff. So I want to go in, I'm going to go next into the next chapter, which is more about it is about teams and more about Icy Edge and stuff like that. But are there any questions before I move on the theory stuff?
May I have a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Timno. Just regarding the first theory, AUM or anxiety uncertainty management, I would ask about if there any maybe optimum level to be find this level as the best level of uncertainty and anxiety, as you maybe as you well known, you know, just it's a difference between there's a difference between anxiety uncertainty management and uncertainty reduction theory. That it says that whenever we consider these both criteria, it would be a best or maybe optimal level of anxiety uncertainty, and it's really important to find which level it's the better to achieve maybe a better communication. Would it be any hint-wise this regard?
Yeah. So that particular theory and the work that has been done with that theory does not address that question. It's an interesting question. So that theory would say that the ideal level is none. You want to be at a level of, your intercultural competence is high enough, you're comfortable enough with the other person that you can communicate with them without experiencing anxiety or uncertainty. Okay, that's what that theory would say. Now, we do know that there is cultural variation in uncertainty tolerance and uncertainty avoidance, which is sort of that cultural value. I don't know of any work that looks at cultural values for uncertainty avoidance along with the anxiety uncertainty management theory. I think a lot of the uncertainty avoidance studies with that as a cultural value focus more on like risk taking, putting yourself in situations where you're taking a risk. But you could conceptualize an intercultural communication encounter as a risky, endeavor. The third thing I thought of as you were talking was that the literature on sort of performance, right? Public speaking, taking a math test, right? Like that shows that a little bit of anxiety is good, that it enhances performance if it's a domain that, we have some self-efficacy in, but that too much anxiety then makes you perform worse. So you touched on all those things in your very interesting question, and I don't have a specific answer for you, but I think that it's a really interesting question, and you could think about all three of those things together as a potential research area.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Let's talk about teams. Okay, so introducing this section, I have a quote from Tony Robbins. To effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all, I can't even read my whole quote, we are all different in the way we perceive the world and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others. Okay. So I want to start with just how we are defining a multicultural team. So Bailey, we're using Bailey and Cohen's definition that a multicultural team is a collection of individuals with different cultural backgrounds who are interdependent in their tasks, who share responsibility for outcomes, who see themselves and are seen by others as an intact social entity embedded in one or more larger social systems, and who manage their relationships across organizational boundaries and beyond. Okay, so that's the working definition for a multicultural team. The literature shows a lot of challenges multicultural teams face, also some synergies, but in general, multicultural teams do struggle because people have different native languages, so there's that communication barrier. They may be working across different time zones and communicating on virtual platforms. Production blocking is something that is a barrier for effective communication in any team, regardless of its cultural composition. And that is the phenomenon when, for example, one person you can't be talking and listening at the same time. You can't be processing what someone else is saying and thinking about the next thing you're going to say at the same time. So we just have, when we have lots of people working together, there can be some inefficiencies where we're not taking full advantage of sort of all the cognitive strengths that you have there, because it's difficult to communicate with lots of people in the room. And then, of course, what we're focusing on here is that employees with different low and high context communication norms see, hear, and interpret verbal and nonverbal communications differently. We found one very interesting study that was an analysis of email communications from a culturally heterogeneous United Nations team. And this was really interesting. The author looked at different communication acts that could be characterized as more low context or high context, and looked at sort of the stages of the team working together, and found that you could see evidence of these different communication styles at all stages of the team working together. So I thought this was a really interesting study, because we do know in team research, there are sort of different stages that teams go through. There are a lot of sort of temporal models of how teams evolve over time and their work changes over time. And so this study showed that, for example, in the first stage, when a team's just getting together, high context team members began with a formal opening and setting the stage and didn't talk about problems explicitly, whereas low context team members opened with proposals and a goal statement and stating the problems. Right. So you have sort of the more relational, holistic setting the stage versus the task focused, let's get down to business. And the author also reported that at later stages of teamwork, high context team members reveal decisions with humility and appreciation, whereas low context team members ask questions and announced decisions. So we see some elements here of both, if you're looking at the Icy Edge model, both message context and relationship context that was found in this study. Okay, so the message domain of low-high context communication. Just as a reminder, this domain includes direct, and more indirect expression, interpretation, conflict approaches, and listening. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of briefly review the literature across the 4 domains. And then I'm going to end with some research propositions that we offer for taking what we already have and really extending it. And I'll give you a little foreshadowing that what we are proposing here and throughout the book is that a lot of the existing literature focuses on or recommends that people adopt a more low context communication style. And what we are proposing is that we really need to do a better job of researching and coming up with recommendations for how intercultural communicators can do so effectively in a way that allows high context communicators to also use their culturally normative style and not always expect them to switch. Okay, so in the message domain, I have a couple studies here. I'll summarize. Before it all, I've used this study several times. It's a really nice study, qualitative work looking at international managers of multicultural teams and their experiences with challenges and synergies in those environments. And so one of the big things that managers say is that in these multicultural team environments, there can be challenges with understanding each other's messages and the intent of those messages. So in terms of intent, we have the attribution bias. So people tend to attribute negative intentions to behaviors that are different from their own culturally normative behaviors. So high context communicators are likely to say that their team members' directness, style of debate, and confrontation is rude and aggressive. Bafar also and colleagues also use the example of different interpretation of words, in particular, yes, no, silence. So that's a lack of a word, and apologies, that those were 4 areas where sort of there was a lot of cultural variation in what those things meant and misinterpretation. There's a lot of work, not a lot, there's some work looking at a multicultural communication climate and proposing that this is sort of a psychological climate that would allow members to use their own culturally normative style and feel low anxiety, low uncertainty, trust for their counterparts so that they are able to communicate effectively. So the first one from 2006, Psychologically Safe Communication Climate. So this one is focusing on the psychological safety construct, if people are familiar with that. So the idea is that you have a communication climate or environment that emphasizes openness, sharing what's on your mind without fear of any sort of repercussions or negative judgments or, cultural bias. So openness and consideration are the 2 main elements of that one. Lisek et al. In 2016 introduced inclusive communication climate. And so this one focuses on creating an environment that is characterized by careful expression. So you're really thinking about how you're going to express yourself based on who your counterparts are, what their cultural background is, and then engaged listening, checking for understanding. Also from 2006, the construct of meaningful participation. So what these authors propose, actually, I'll come back to this later again, but that when you have multicultural teams, you do a lot of work sort of in subgroups and then regrouping. And in these regrouping sessions, you focus on each team member having responsibility for creating space for themselves and everyone else in the group and expressing respect for themselves and everyone else in the group. So that's where we are on message domain in multicultural teams research. And we wanted to just show you here a little snapshot of, with the Icy Edge feedback reports if you do a team report. Here's an example of what it might look like for the expression, which is in the message domain. So what you see over here is that you have, this would be me, this little person here, and then you have a bunch of dots on this continuum of more low context and more high context. And this group here, down at the bottom, there's a key code. So the largest circle means that 2 team members had that same score. So you see some individual team members and then 2 team members here. So larger bubbles show that you have more of a cluster of people with the same communication style. And the message domain includes expression, interpretation, conflict management, and then expression includes these 3 different subscores. Okay. So the relationship domain, just to remind everyone, includes the way that people adjust their communication, the degree to which they adjust it based on the status of their counterpart, to save face for themselves or others, the way that people communicate through networks, and the degree of openness, or how people communicate with strangers versus close others. So existing literature that touches on the relationship domain includes literature on communication in cross-cultural settings related to power and status. So there's some work on suggesting that in a team setting, depending what role you have on that team, the norms for how you communicate can be linked to that role, and that can differ by culture. There's quite a bit of work on language proficiency and power, showing that in a multicultural team, if English is the language, lingua franca, people who are not native speakers are ascribed less power. And that's a pretty robust finding. And then the other area of literature that's related to the relationship domain is the work on subgroups. So within a diverse team, you can have subgroups form where people share certain commonalities that lead them to their bond to be sort of closer than other people. So if you have a team, for example, of 2 men, 4-person team of 2 men and 2 women, there could be sort of 2 subgroups formed where the 2 women tend to communicate more with each other and the 2 men tend to communicate more with each other. And this can be based on age, it can be based on nationality, all sorts of things. So there's some work showing that these fault lines that cause subgroups based on nationality in multicultural teams restrict the communication of non-task related information. So people are less likely to share relational information across those subgroups. And we know that relationship-oriented communication promotes interpersonal connections. Low context team members, though, are more likely to emphasize task-related communication. And so that can be an issue to get that sort of relational communication happening across all the connections within a multicultural team. The last bullet point is about some literature that actually shows subgroup strength has been shown to have positive effects on team learning, and something called fusion teamwork, which is basically sort of, you know, like a synergistic outcome of teamwork. And so it doesn't only have negative effects, but it does create communication challenges that teams need to overcome. And so here's an example of relational adjustment. So the degree to which you adjust what you say and how you say it, depending on who your counterparts are, where people who are more high context are more likely to adjust what they say and how they say it. And then a sample team report here, again, that shows sort of the dispersion across a multicultural team of people's styles of relational adjustment. Okay, time domain. I'm going to try to finish in the next 7 minutes. So we have time for questions. So the time domain Just to remind you again, this relates to scheduling flexibility, deadline flexibility, multitasking, and how people move through clock time versus event time. So there's quite a bit of research. This is done almost exclusively with virtual teams because it's rare that you have multicultural teams that are co-located, being in different time zones. I don't even think that's possible. So when people are working virtually in multicultural teams and they're in different time zones, then coordination is more complex. That by far study that I keep referring to, those managers talked a lot about the language of time and running into misunderstandings and conflicts related to people's understandings of, a meeting start time or an end time, how strict deadlines are, what a lunch break is, and as well the meaning of time phrases. So what does it mean when someone says they need something by the end of the day? And then there's some work, recent work by Mel and colleagues looking at, so if you have a multicultural team working virtually across multiple time zones, and you have a team member whose time zone is close to other members, that person can act as a temporal broker. So basically they sometimes fall into this role where, because their workday overlaps in the morning with some of the team members and at the end of the day with some of the other team members, they end up being the person who sort of, mediates communication across these time zones. Here's an example of an Icy Edge team report for scheduling, which is one of the aspects of the time domain. You can see this is really spread out on scheduling. So they will really need to work with this very high context, very flexible team member to make sure everyone is on the same page about when things are going to happen on what timeline. Okay, and the space domain, this is about how people use sort of physical, audible space between them in communication. So it's related to interruptions, touching, dramatic expression, interpersonal space, silence, and eye contact. So there's not a whole lot of research in this area. There's some stuff on interruptions and turn taking. And the research has found that people in different cultures have different perceptions of sort of the appropriateness of having a more overlapping conversational style versus a more turn-taking conversational style. And those different perceptions and norms can lead to conflict in multicultural teams. So this one study by Ayoko et al. Found that so talking over, interrupting, that would be a high context expressive cultural communication norm, that in a multicultural team that led to conflict that was destructive. Humor, smiling, and long pauses, these are examples of high context reserved cultural norms and low context norms. Those things led to conflict that was constructive. So the team used it to improve their processes and their outcomes. And then we have a little bit of research showing cultural differences in body language and emotion display, and how the meanings are different and they are interpreted differently in different cultures. So this can include things like, when someone feels more powerful or is in a more high status role, how is that expressed non-verbally in their posture? It can include things like norms for eating during meetings, and then also emotional display rules. So the degree to which people actually express their emotion, on their face. And here's an example of a team report on physical contact, which is one of the space domain constructs. And so the way this is coded here, so where it says high context dependent, this is coded such that that would be people who are more likely to touch their counterpart and stand near their counterpart. So it's really high context expressive. And then over here would be high context reserved. So you're very unlikely to do that. And low context is kind of more in the middle. Okay. So I have 4 propositions that appear in the book that I want to share with you. These are areas that we think are really ripe for future research and contributions in the area of multicultural team communication effectiveness. So related to the message domain, we propose that research look at the degree to which team members' attention to implicit nonverbal messaging and the degree to which they are engaged listeners will increase overall team members' participation and engagement while decreasing misunderstanding. We propose that related to the relationship domain of communication context, nurturing interpersonal connections and team cohesion will decrease perceived power differences, and that would then increase team members' active participation and use of their own culturally normative styles without adapting to, for example, the low context norm. With respect to the time context, we propose that high context team members who move and communicate flexibly through time will be more likely than low context members who move and communicate through structured clock time to be temporal brokers. That's the example from the Mel research, and also to fill coordination roles. And lastly, related to space context, we propose that proactively explaining culture-based meanings associated with spatial cues, for example, silence means I'm listening versus silence means I probably disagree. Interruption means I'm excited and engaged versus interruption means I'm getting frustrated, right? So actually managing the process by working through those things and talking about them will increase team members' participation and engagement while decreasing misunderstanding and misattribution. Okay, and just to close off, and we'll still have 5 minutes for questions. What these chapters are focusing on and saying in summary is that effective communication in global teams, it requires not only translating meaning across sort of low and high context communication domains, but also actively managing managing the engagement. One sec. So it's not just about the decoding process. It's about managing the encoding as well as the interaction and the decoding. Want to point out here that Icy Edge and the updated Intrivity assessment have these team reports. I gave you some little snapshots of that. And the feedback reports that individuals get, as well as the sort of team coaching that we train you to do, is geared towards improving flexibility in communication styles and accommodating and using diverse styles, not just adopting a low context style. So as I mentioned before, to date, the recommendations for effective global team communication are largely low context. They're saying, okay, in order for everyone to understand each other, you just have to be really literal and direct. And ensuring meaningful participation. But people haven't looked at how meaningful participation can be different in different cultures. So further exploration of the 4 domains of communication context is needed so we can have a more nuanced understanding of communication challenges and synergies for global teams. And a big takeaway of our book is that future direction should focus on strategies that increase engagement, understanding, interpersonal connection while using culturally normative low and high context communication styles. And my dog's barking because he knows I'm done. This is a snapshot of the other chapters in the book. But we can open it up now to questions. And I apologize if there were questions along the way. I didn't see any hands up, but I didn't have my chat window open. So what more can I tell you? What questions do you have or examples of your own you want to share?
May I have a question?
Yes,
Okay.
please, Mehdi.
Thank you again for your nice presentation. I would like to know more about maybe the characteristics of the communication counterparts. In which domain would it be categorized? I care about maybe the meaning that it would not be a part of message. But it's just constructed in every second in every counterpart, communication counterpart. For this reason, I would like to know more about this. Maybe in which domain would it be categorized? The characteristics or maybe moral features of communication counterparts.
I believe, and this is open for discussion, so I'll go first and anyone else, please jump in. I believe that would fit under the message domain. So the message domain is very much about, what is said in words versus what is left unsaid, but it's understood. So something about sort of the morality of, a particular situation and what is said or what isn't said, having an understanding of the unspoken elements around that would be part of the message domain. I think that is where it would fit the most.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions?
Wendy, I have a question
Yes,
related to language proficiency. You talked about
Sure.
how individuals who are not as proficient as in what is their second language have less power. Any suggestions when those individuals, because of their self-awareness, of their feeling of inadequacy, of being able to say things clearly and express their ideas, they basically move to background. They choose not to speak to avoid what they perceive as embarrassing situations. Any suggestions about how to promote, encourage their confidence and comfort with participating in a multicultural team?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ed. And I think the research on those psychologically safe communication climates is really trying to get at the question you're asking, right? Like, how can we create a setting where everyone feels valued and has the confidence to speak up and know that they're being heard? And so I think oftentimes that really comes to the leader, right? So in a team setting, the leader needs to set the example for engaged listening. The turn-taking style I find works very well in multicultural teams where, you go around a circle and everyone has a chance to offer their thoughts on a particular topic without others interrupting. So that's sort of one thing. And then we need to teach people to model engaged listening when people are doing that. So if someone is, not a native speaker of English and it's taking them longer to find a word or to express themselves, that we don't just, pick up our phone and start doing something else, but we actively continue to show our engaged listening and respect, creating that respectful space for that person is something we can do. And then from the individual who's the non-native speaker, if you were trying to coach them, I would offer suggestions for them to really spend more time sort of before meetings in preparing what they think, the kinds of things they want to say, maybe even writing it out. They could send things in advance over email to the team, points that they want to make in the upcoming meeting. And then that might take some of the pressure off of having to find the right word and express yourself really articulately on the fly.
Wendy, I wanted actually to add to, because that was a concern I had, Ed. So thanks for bringing it up. A couple of thoughts. One is we talk about talking, and you kind of touched it a little bit there, Wendy, in talking about people can have challenges on the verbal side, but they can be absolutely brilliant on the written side.
Yes.
I think the opportunity, there's a couple of tools that in this domain that I've worked with in a group context that might be of some value.
Please.
One is we have an exercise called Think, Write, Share, and it's done anonymously. So you have a point of discussion. You give a space of, say, 2 minutes for people to think about it, and then whether you're in person or virtually, virtually, is using a tool as simple as a Post-it to put your thoughts down in writing. And the origin is, no one knows the origin of those. And then you bring it into a group context, and you see, so if you're using Mural Board, if it's a virtual whiteboard, for example, you see all these Post-its with ideas about this thing, and no one knows who it is. So there's no hierarchy, there's no gender, there's no language other than what you see on the Post-it. And the group can look and evaluate this and then vote anonymously as to what they think is the ones that are most redeeming approaches, hierarchy and talk more. And sometimes you don't even reveal who it is, but in the case of where you have people that are challenged verbally, you might discover that the least experienced, the least competent verbally has the best ideas. And that then changes the mindset of the rest of the group over time, hopefully, that says, this person has value and I need to listen through their struggles verbally, or just give them a different weight than I thought otherwise I would attribute to that person. That's one tool. The other one is everyone speaks once before anyone else can speak again. And it's a little different from go around the room in the sense of the pressure of having to, oh, I'm next, what am I going to say? But it's the opportunity to not have someone like me doing right now, dominating conversation.
I love that. Thank you so much for both of those suggestions, Jeff. And I'm familiar with a software called Power Noodle that does something like you were describing with the virtual idea generation and moving through sort of brainstorming and categorization and selection and decision-making phases, all anonymously for multicultural teams. And you can also just do it with a virtual whiteboard, I think, as well, as you indicated. Thank you so much. Okay, we are a bit over time. So Jeff, do you want us to keep going if there's other questions, or should we stop here?
Yeah, I think for those that need to go, of course, we thank you for coming. Want to remind you that in 1 month, the second Friday of next month, we'll have another Lunch and Learn. This one on negotiation specifically. So please register for that. I will send the video, the PowerPoint and everything to you if you registered for this session at some point over the weekend or by Monday. If you have to go, thank you so much for joining. If not, Wendy, are you free to take a few more questions if there are some?
Sure. Yes, sure.
All right. Any additional thoughts here? I know a lot of you are really experienced in this area. So even if you have just additional comments or observations, that would be applicable as well. Grazia raised her hand.
Oh, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to, first of all, apologize because I was slightly late and struggling to get myself ready because I was having a meeting first. And anyway, I just want to say how instructive I'm finding this webinar series, and I'm very looking forward to buying your books. When will it be available actually for purchase?
It's supposed to be by the end of March, and we will send out an email and the link and let everyone know as soon as it's available.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And well, could you possibly put the link to the next webinar for the negotiation one, just that you just mentioned? Yes, that would be nice. Thank you.
Yes,
I know you put it here, you sent us an email, but I think I have too many emails to go through, so that would be very good to have. And yeah, no, it was a very, it's a very good series, and I find the ICH tool that you have developed very useful, and I'm now using it with my students, and I'm going to use it in some in-company trainings because it does help a lot with high context, in fact, cultures that are not very well taken into account by other models and other testing tools. So yeah, thank you for developing it, and yeah, that's all I wanted to say, nothing more.
Thank you so much, Grazia. So Jeff, I don't know that we have the link available yet, do we?
Yeah,
To
we
put in the
do.
chat?
Yeah, here, I have it now. I'm just gonna
Oh,
put,
wonderful.
but that will go out in email, as well as to LinkedIn groups and so forth. But let me just do it right now.
When is it going to be actually? Because I have some intercultural negotiation students who might want to attend it, but I don't know if that's open to non-ICH certified instructors. Is it open to students as well? They're MA students. I don't know if I could give them the link. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think it would be great. What do you think?
so what we ask is, I don't know if there's supposed to be a bracket at the end of that link. I just sent the link out, but it looks like it has, that bracket might not be. So Grazia, what we've been asking people is if they could, limit their invitation to one person.
Yeah.
So maybe not like a whole class.
Yeah. In any case, I don't think many students will participate. I know them, yeah, but I know some of them are the final phases of their studies, and so maybe I will give it to the most motivated ones or one. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, if they're grad students too, I think it would be okay to bring a couple, not like a class of 20 undergrads or something, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you that would be, yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to disturb you any further, but yeah, I look forward to reading your book and the next sessions. Thank you. Goodbye.
Lovely. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
joining. Jeff Cohn is raising his hand.
Yeah, it's Jeff.
I don't want to go before others have, because I have a couple of layers of comments. So sorry. If other people want to go first, please.
Patty, did you have anything you wanted to add? Oh, it's Patricia. It's not Patty. Yeah, I don't think so. I think, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, did I understand you correctly? Is that the focus is on more of a low context orientation is sort of the recommendation going forward, or I just mishear what you said?
More high context. Well,
more high, oh, sorry.
I guess it's not necessarily a more high context orientation, to be honest. I shouldn't say that. No, it's making space for high context communicators to use their own culturally normative communication styles in a multicultural setting, and being understood as they intend their messages to be understood. So it's teaching low context communicators, how to effectively engage, and not expect the high context communicators to just always adapt to them. So it's kind of more flexibility on the low context team members or communicators side, but it's also the message is, I mean, that's where we sort of want the research to focus on, but we want, I think we're proposing in the book that the overall sort of model of, you know, encoding, decoding, feedback loop of communication, that is focused more on sort of the common understanding and the interpersonal connections that are created through doing that effectively, as then a means to promote cooperation and collaboration. Does that make sense?
No, I'm here's a case in point. I'm glad I asked the question as Mr. Low Context. And it's something that I saw in country quite a bit, where low context folks were quick to jump to they understood things perfectly. And it's clear they didn't as the bridge person in the room. And despite sort of prodding in the ribs, weren't even self-aware that they were not self-aware of what they were doing. And I find it, I was concerned it was like high context has to continue to be the ones that accommodate the most. And I believe there's exceptional value to be gotten from the two extremes and everything in between.
Yes,
And
we
so
agree.
it's sort of, and I'm not a researcher, so I apologize that I can't bring all the citations and stuff up, but I find it really, really useful to have those to add, maybe it's credibility to my contextual life experiences kind of thing. So I sort of depend on you all doing the research on this stuff. And then I guess we didn't have anything in here around generational issues, but I find it interesting that the younger generation may be easier that are high context in theory, are able to more easily navigate the low context, because so much of their social interactions tend to be, for better or for worse, sort of elbows and ribs kind of generate, as opposed to older generation that find it so jarring and shut down older generation, not my older generation, but folks 40. So anyway, I have a harder time adapting or surfing, if you will, those different waves and contexts.
Oh, surfing, I like that.
And then the hierarchy thing is just is a crazy thing. I mean, I lived in Japan. It was very interesting to watch the process of two individuals who are total strangers trying to figure out where they were vis-a-vis each other. And we sort of do it somewhat informally, and we sort of laugh at it, you know, as Americans, going, "Oh, look at how they look at," this is probably too old school, but business cards and how they look at it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like taking an envelope in the post office and getting it to the right slot. You know, it's understanding context. Anyway, so so good stuff. Appreciate being in here, Jeff. Obviously, I'm really dated on some of this stuff, so I'll email you separately on how to get a little bit fresher on the assessment and some other stuff you mentioned as well in the conversation. But this is wonderful. So thanks for doing the research.
Great. Thank you.
Look forward to connecting, Jeff.
Yeah, some of your examples sound like great examples. So definitely let's sort of stay in touch. So
remember,
I
it's
appreciate you sharing that.
Practice. So the people espousing this were actually pretty bad practitioners of the tool. So do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. All
Great.
right.
So I think with that, we'll end today's session. I sent the link to next week's session, but look for an email from me in the next few days with more information, and hopefully see everyone in a month, if not sooner.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much, Wendy.
Bye.